Okay. So when there is a temple in Jerusalem, and then on Passover, how do we observe Passover? Do you guys know? We go to the temple we get there, and then on the afternoon of Passover, we slaughter a sheep and we cook the sheep, a lamb, and we cook the lamb, and then a group of us get together and we have Seder with the lamb, and everybody eats a little bit of the lamb. So, in order to celebrate Passover that way in Jerusalem, you have to be able to be ritually pure. So, right, to do our Seder now, you don't have to be ritually pure. None of us are ritually pure. But to do that kind of going to the temple, sacrificing the lamb, you have to be pure. So in that case, that's what it's for. So that Pesach Sheni is, right, second Passover is a second chance for people who weren't able to partake of the Passover sacrifice the first time. Nowadays, since we don't have a Passover sacrifice, it's irrelevant, which is why I don't even know the laws of Pesach Sheni and you own chametz on it. It makes sense that you can't own chametz on the kind of original week, and therefore, why would you also not be allowed to own chametz Pesach Sheni, right? It makes sense, but I have no idea. Is it for a whole week? I don't know any of these deals. That's what it is. I wanted to welcome Chris. Um, did you want to say anything by means of introduction?
I'm so excited to be here. Thank y'all so much.
Okay, well, um, so we are starting, and we kind of in our class we're starting a new book of the Torah. We went through Exodus pretty quickly, but let's just review words. What? So what? Okay, so let's review the Jewish Bible. We don't tend to call it the Bible. What do we call it? What do we call the Bible?
Torah,
So Torah is the first part. It's very good. It's the Tanakh.
Tanakh,
Tanakh. Okay. So the T stands for what you just said, Torah. Um, what does the N stand for?
Nevi'im,
Nevi'im. Very good. Nevi'im. And Nevi'im are in English
Prophets.
prophets.
prophets. Good. Saskia, you have some competition here. Um, but can everybody name a prophet?
Elijah.
So right.
Amos.
So Elijah is a prophet. He doesn't have his own book. I shouldn't have. He doesn't have his own book. Um, so
Amos.
Amos is a prophet who has their own book. And there's also historical books in here. So, for instance, uh, Joshua, Judges, Kings, Amos, Isaiah, Ezekiel. Okay, and then the Chaf of the KH of Tanakh. Anybody know what it stands for?
Ketuvim.
Ketuvim. Right.
Ketuvim.
So, what's the book that has lots of poems?
Hashirim.
Okay,
Psalms.
so Song of Songs, Song of Songs, um, Psalms, Ecclesiastes, etc. Okay, so we're not as familiar with these parts because we don't read them in synagogue every week. We only read the Torah in every week. Okay, so the Torah has five books, for which, and because of that, it's also called the Chumash. Um, this book of the Torah is what? What's that?
Genesis.
Yep, Bereshit equals
Oh,
Genesis.
Bereshit. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's it. That's okay. It's about like the creation and patriarchs. All right, second book is what?
Exodus.
Exodus.
Yep, and Hebrew that's in Hebrew, Shmot. So we have the time spent in Egypt, and we have the rule Mount Sinai, and we have rules for making the Mishkan. Okay, the third book,
Exodus.
Leviticus,
Oh,
good,
Leviticus.
Vayikra. And this is going to be about sacrifices. Because so much of Judaism in the time of the temple centered around what happened in the temple, which was animal sacrifice. So that's the whole book of Leviticus. And fourth book of the Torah is,
Deuteronomy,
that's the fifth.
Numbers.
Yep,
Numbers, number
Numbers,
4.
Midbar, and fifth is Deuteronomy. Devarim. Okay. So what's Numbers about, by the way?
Numbering the people.
Well, the beginning is numbering the people, though, but the book on the whole is about the time, the 40 years in the desert. Okay. And what's Devarim about? Or what is it, I should say? I
The
mean,
retelling
so who's retelling?
Joshua,
It's not Joshua, it's before Joshua. So this is,
Moses.
Moses.
yeah, this is the last month of Moses' life.
Ah,
He gives a big long speech. Okay. So I think our Vayikra is we're not going to do for very long, but um, today we're starting with, sorry, let me just organize myself here. So there's different sacrifices that we're not going to go into all the different sacrifices in this class, but there's um, daily sacrifices that's called Olah. Olah means go up. There's Flamim, which means to repay, as we do that after a vow. There's sacrifices after a sin, that's called Chatat and Acham, it's after a sin. Um, the basic word for sacrifice is korban, and that comes from the root. What root does that come from? Does anybody know?
Draw close.
Yeah, korban stands from karov, to draw close. So why is a sacrifice called, in English, I feel like in English it has this whole meaning that it doesn't actually have in Hebrew, right? Because nowadays when we say to sacrifice, we mean colloquially to give up something, right? I'm sacrificing my time for this. So generally or that's a big sacrifice. But if you think about the Latin root, which is actually pretty pretty close to what it means in Hebrew, I think, right? What in the Latin, right? Sacer is holy, and FIC means to make, right? So sacrifice means to make it holy. So when I sacrifice something, the thing is, to make holy is its own word in Hebrew, which is lahakdish, to make it holy. So you make it holy means you donate it to the temple. But korban, what is drawing close to God? Why is the root of korban to draw close?
Because we don't only have the daily offerings, but we also have the sin offerings, for example. So as a means of doing teshuvah, to return to God.
Right.
So that's a
Yeah.
means of drawing close.
Yeah. So both in the everyday practice, which isn't related to sin, but which kind of keeps our connection to God, and also in the sin offerings, which repairs our relationship to God, it's about drawing close to God. Um, so that's and yeah. Oops. Sorry. Just um, so I wanted to share uh, a couple texts that go a little more in depth into this. Mm, Okay. So this is from the Talmud, right? Brachot here is the first first book of the Talmud. The question was asked, what if you made a mistake and you forgot the afternoon prayer? So you're supposed to pray 3 times a day, you forgot to pray the afternoon prayer. Could you say it twice in the evening? If you think that you can answer by quoting, um, if one made a mistake and forgot the evening prayer, you should say it twice in the morning. That's different because it's one day. As it's written, there was evening, there was morning one day. So they're making the argument that if I forgot the afternoon prayer, once evening comes, right, the Jewish day begins at sunset. Once the evening begins, it's a new day. Maybe I can't make up for it. But the prayer, the tefillah, is a substitute for sacrifice. And the day having passed, the sacrifice becomes void. So how is prayer a substitute for sacrifice?
Both bring you closer to God.
So yeah, so in other words, we can't draw close to God with our sacrifices now, and therefore we draw close to God with our tefillah, with our prayer. So it actually gives two options, right? So maybe prayer is a substitute for sacrifice, and then it says maybe prayer is supplication. Maybe actually prayer just has to do with connecting to God, and one may pray whenever he wishes. The tension kind of goes unresolved in the Talmud. There's also two different origins for prayer. If prayer is based on, let me find this. I find what I'm looking for. If prayer is based on sacrifices, right? That's if prayer is okay. So if prayer is based on sacrifices, then the origin of the Torah is Vayikra. That's easy. If prayer is based on supplication, where do we have supplication in the Torah? Who prayed in the Torah?
Well, the three daily prayers are associated with the three forefathers who instituted
Yeah.
each of them, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah, so you actually do get Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob praying in the Torah. Actually, you get Rivka too, because she also prayed to God when she was barren. But so then one possibility is prayer comes from sacrifices. One possibility is prayer comes from the patriarchs. Abraham, they say, instituted, I think, the morning prayers. Isaac was in the afternoon because he prayed in the afternoon, and Jacob, I might have
Jacob
it
is
wrong.
in the
Was it just
no,
Jacob
no,
the
you're
evening?
right. Jacob
Am I
is in the
right?
evening. Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So this tension, by the way, goes through the Talmud. Is it this? Now the truth is that even when the temple was in existence, they did have synagogues. They had prayers. If you go to Masada, there's an ancient synagogue on Masada, facing the temple, and that people used to pray there during the time of the temple. So this is a quote from Rabbeinu Bechaya, who connects the he talks about how sacrifice is atonement for prayer. This is the reason the high priest burnt up the fat parts, the kidneys, and the tissue attached to the liver. All of these parts of man had to partake in order for the sin to be carried out, and they were instrumental in turning away from the path of goodness to the path of evil. This is the deeper meaning of the fat parts. The part called cheleb is the fat which causes man to become gross and arrogant. It's responsible for man's inherent pride and arrogance. So when we sacrifice the fat, we symbolically are trying to sacrifice our own arrogance. And then he says, the kidneys are the source of what's called eitzel, counsel. So when you're sacrificing the kidneys, you're sacrificing your bad ideas, bad thoughts. And the reason the tissue adjoining the liver had to be burnt up is that desire, carnal, and other kinds of greed which permeate man have their origin in that region of the body. So we're trying to burn up, get rid of our greed. All these procedures have one purpose: to achieve atonement for man's sin, which originate in the fatness of his heart and the planning of his ego, which originate in the liver. So actually he's this interesting thing. He says it's burned in the north part, which is the reason that evil comes from. So we send the evil back to where it's from. But symbolically, we're trying to cleanse ourselves of those things. There is in the Midrash, they actually say that prayer is even better than sacrifice. So this is what Scripture says: to do what is right and just is more desired by the Lord than sacrifice. That's from the book of Proverbs. Scripture does not say as much as, but more than. How's it better? Sacrifices could only function inside the temple. To do what's right and just is mandated inside and outside the temple. And by the way, I've been saying prayer, but here it's like they're saying no, even righteous action is better. So it can be outside the temple. Another opinion, whereas sacrifices could only atone for unintentional accidental sins, acts of righteousness and justice atone even for intentional sins. So it's like they're saying, sacrifices really aren't as great as what we can do now. And then in the end, right, they quote Rabbi Shmuel ben Nachmani says, when the Holy One of Blessing said to Natan, "Go tell David my servant, thus says Adonai, you shall not build me a house to dwell in, for I have not dwelt in a house since the day that I brought up Israel unto this day. I've gone from tent to tent, from one tabernacle to another." Right? In other words, don't think that we need sacrifice to have God's presence. We need righteousness and justice. And then the last source I wanted to share about this. This is from Maimonides' Guide to the Perplexed. Does everybody know what Maimonides is? Who Maimonides was? Okay, do you know what the Guide to the Perplexed is? Liliana, do you know what the Guide to the Perplexed is? Okay, so Maimonides was a rabbi in the 13th century. Or 12th century. He was born in Egypt. No, he was born in Spain, and he was run out of Spain by the radical Muslims, the Almohades. So when he was born in Spain, it was what's called the Golden Age of Spain, when the Muslims and Jews and everybody had open dialogue. It was a very intellectually open atmosphere. The radical Muslims took over. They chased the Jews out, so he had to go to Egypt. He has two major works. One of them is his law code. That's the Mishnah Torah. And the other major work is called the Guide to the Perplexed. And in this book, he's trying to reconcile science and religion. Now, science in the 12th century was philosophy. So when we talk about Maimonides, they call him a Jewish philosopher. But I think it might even be more accurate to call him a Jewish scientist. He's trying to reconcile science and religion.
Was he a physician?
Yeah, he was a doctor. Yeah. So, and he thinks of, and God, for him, he has a very philosophical notion of God. God's not like a being. God doesn't enjoy the smell of burnt offerings. So the question he wrestles with the sacrifices is, why on earth would God want sacrifices? So he's not very keen on sacrifices. Here's what he says. It's impossible to go suddenly from one extreme to the other. God sent Moses to make the Israelites a kingdom of priests and a holy nation by means of the knowledge of God. So for Maimonides, the goal of Torah is for us to know God. It's not for us to sacrifice animals, it's to know God. But the custom, which was in those days general among men, and the general mode of worship in which the Israelites were brought up, consisted of sacrificing animals in those temples which contained certain images, to bow down to those images and burn incense before them. So God really wanted people to know God, but what people were used to doing was burning incense and bowing down to gods and sacrificing animals. It was in accordance with the wisdom and plan of God that God did not command us to give up and discontinue all these manners of service. For to obey such a commandment, it would have been contrary to the nature of man, who generally cleaves to that to which he is used to. So in other words, God couldn't have told the Jews, you know what, I actually don't want animal sacrifices. It's very nice of you, but it's not really what I want. I want you to study and daven and meditate. He couldn't have said that. It would in those days have made the same impression as a prophet would make at present if he called us to the service of God and told us in his name that we should not pray to him, not fast, not seek his help in time of trouble, that we should serve him in thought and not by any action. So in other words, right, they couldn't take it in. If God had told the Jews no animal sacrifice, they couldn't take it in. Just as if someone now said, I don't actually need your prayers, fasting, or any of that. I just need you to think about me. Do you think Rambam is implying that we don't even need prayer?
No, definitely not. I don't think that's what he says at all, because prayer is a means of getting closer to God and of knowing God.
Well, for keep in mind, you're quoting. I don't know who specifically you're quoting. Definitely, like the Lubavitcher Rebbe would say that. Nachmanides, I think, would say that. There's a lot of people who say what you're saying. Would Maimonides say that? So this is the Guide for the Perplexed is a very tricky work. He doesn't really let on to what he fully thinks. And this passage, right, suggests that, like, you know what, we had animal sacrifice, then we had prayer, and maybe sometime in the future we're going to actually have pure meditation.
Maybe sometime in the future we'll be in his presence legitimately and we can, be closer to him.
Well, I think for Rambam, we can be in God's presence simply through purifying our minds.
And prayer is a form of meditation.
Uh, you're coming
It's
back to yeah.
I know
I'm not
I'm
sure.
not
I'm not sure.
sticking to the source.
You can stick to the source. I'm not so sure for Rambam, by the way. I'm not so sure. I think for him, philosophical study may be a kind of meditation. When Rambam talks about meditation, he might simply be talking about study and contemplation. Purifying your thoughts. So um, Rambam's tricky. You can't never quite nail him down. But for sure, he's saying, right? God actually didn't want animal sacrifice per se, but like he couldn't tell people not to do it. So instead, God allowed these kinds of service to continue. So he said, okay, fine, sacrifice animals. He transferred to his service that which had formerly been served as a worship of created beings and of things imaginary, unreal, and commanded us to serve him in the same manner. So in other words, he says, well, I don't really want you sacrificing animals, but if you're going to sacrifice animals, at least sacrifice them to me and not to the stars. So, any comments or thoughts on this passage?
When I think of sacrifice from back then, I think of like I have a daughter. If we had a lamb in the house, that would be her pet. She would love that pet. But we would know, maybe just the adults would know, but I guess back then the child would know we're going to sacrifice this thing and we're going to eat it. And so you better be good or you're going to be the reason why we have to sacrifice this. I don't know. Thinking
Well,
out
so
loud.
yeah, so Rambam does have this thing where he says when you go to the temple and you sacrifice an animal, and the priest puts his head and you put your hand on the animals and you said, I did this, and then the animal's put to death, you're supposed to think to yourself, wow, that should be being put to death. So that's what Rambam says. Right? So you're kind of identifying with the animal. Okay, so yeah, so we're not gonna um, that's really what I have to share about sacrifices. Any other kind of comments or questions about sacrifices? Okay. Um, so let me just. Okay, so I asked you guys to read Greenberg chapter 9 and 13, and those are the chapters on marriage and divorce. So there's a couple of big ideas I want to share. There's an idea of beshert. It's a Yiddish word, beshert, which means um, divinely ordained. So the idea is that we have a soulmate. When we're told when they take a census in the book of Numbers, they're give a half shekel, a half coin, because each of our souls is a half of a soul. And we try to find our soulmate and to marry a soulmate. So the idea is that when we find our soulmate, that's the person we marry. We're allowed to divorce, but the Talmud says the altar sheds tears when a person gets divorced. So it's not an ideal. Um, the we're going to talk a little bit more about what Jewish wisdom about marriage, but the wedding itself is called Kiddushin. So Kiddushin means to sanctify, as in like like to say, meaning you're uniquely, we form a unique relationship. Um, so the Shabbos before the actual wedding, there's a custom to call up the groom, and if it's an egalitarian synagogue, the groom and bride, to the Torah. That's called ufruf. Um, ufruf is Yiddish. It means like to call up. That's what it means. At the now let me show you a picture of. There we go. Okay, let me just share screen. So at the actual wedding, okay. So what do we notice here at the wedding? Um, so first of all, the thing they're under, the canopy. Anybody know what that's called?
Well,
This is
If
called
you
the
hadn't,
chuppah. What's that? It's called the chuppah. Um, Sometimes it looks here like it's tied. Oh no, actually I don't know how it's being. Oh, it's being held up by these birch things. Sometimes it's held by people. So there'll be like people holding the poles. I've even done pop-up weddings where like we just held a tallis overhead. Um, Here there's this nice little lacy thing, but it's customary also to use a tallis for it. Um, so you notice that um, down here on the left, there's this document here, this big piece of paper. And we know what that's called? That's called the
well,
ketubah. What's that?
I just said ketubah.
Yeah, that's the ketubah. It's a written document. Um, It used to be just a piece of paper with writing on it, not so artistic, but nowadays people get really artistic ones. Actually, there's this website, ketubah.com, which is beautiful ones. Um, and it's written generally in Aramaic and then English, and it's got three witnesses at the bottom. Um, the witness, it's not actually the husband and wife who are signing it. It's people who are witnessing what happens in the ketubah. I'm sorry, what happens under the chuppah. So the way that they get married, what action do they do that actually makes them married, you know? So the way you get married in Judaism, the husband gives the wife really anything of value and says, by this you are wed, and she accepts it. So traditionally it's a ring, right? So the husband will give a wife a ring, say, by this ring you are wed to me, and then she holds it up on her finger to show that she's accepting it. I've seen it done on a tallis bag. You could do it on anything. You could do it on a box of fig Newtons. Um, the Talmud actually has a very funny case. I don't remember what they decided. I think they decided it doesn't work. Was, well, what if he gives her the figs one by one and she eats them as he gives them to her? So it's like, buy these figs, you are wed to me, and he gives her one, she eats it, he gives her another. Right. So the point is, it can be anything, but it's generally a ring. Um, the woman, when they come up, traditionally circles the man 7 times. So the man will be standing up, the woman circles him 7 times. If you think about it, the man is circling her with the ring, the woman is circling him. So they're kind of enclosing each other. In egalitarian circles, the woman will also give the husband a ring. Um, at they don't have here the glass of wine. Um, so after they give the ring, there's something called Sheva Brachot, which means the 7 blessings. And these are blessings said over a cup of wine. So they'll pour a cup of wine and say the Sheva Brachot. Um, and then after the end of the wedding ceremony, there's something that happens. Anybody know what? Very end of the ceremony?
Breaking the glass.
Yeah, yeah, they smash a glass. So there'll be a glass wrapped in a napkin on the floor, and generally the man smashes it with his foot. Anybody know what that symbolizes?
something
I,
that you can't change back.
I think it's
Destruction
Interesting.
of the temple.
breaking the past.
So
No?
no, those are so Chris and
The
Olivia, those are
commemoration of the
interesting, but
destruction of the temple.
yeah, so it's a commemoration of the destruction of the temple. So there's this idea that at every moment of our life, we are always remembering the destruction of the temple, especially at times of great simcha, of great happiness. Um, right? We're always remembering that it's not complete. The world's not redeemed. The world, the world is still broken. So, um, It's not only then, by the way. There's a custom I read about even. So first of all, there's a custom to leave part of your house unpainted, unfinished. So I saw in a video this guy in Jerusalem, he showed us behind a painting in his basement, he had a part that was unpainted. I even read in a 16th century source, or no, 18th century, um, that it's a custom to leave a corner of your table up unset. So this guy in the Poland, I think, right, he would even leave a tiny bit of his table unset. So we're always supposed to remember that we're in exile, that the temple's broken, that things that not to get too comfortable. We're not meant to get too comfortable. Um, Now here you barely see it, but you see the white thing, her, what do you call that thing coming down behind her head? It's
Veil.
not even it's barely a veil at this point coming behind her head. But that's supposed to be a veil. So it's also traditional for for the woman to be veiled. This goes back to the wedding of, excuse me a second. So what was the wedding in the Torah where the husband could not see the wife's face?
Story with Leah and Rachel.
Yes.
Yeah, right. So when Jacob thinks he's marrying Rachel, and he actually turns out he's marrying Leah. Her face must have been veiled. So we put a veil on. She puts a veil on her face. Generally, it's see-through. Although I was at a Hasidic wedding where the veil was not see-through, like she was literally walking up to the chuppah in the dark, being like led on either side. There were I think probably her mother and her new mother-in-law were walking her, but like completely covered. It was very intense. But yeah, in commemoration of Jacob and Leah. Um, before the wedding, before the wedding, the ketubah says, let me see if I can get the text, see if I can get this big enough so we can actually see it. Yeah. So on the first day of the week, and the seventh day of the month of Shvat, um, the beloved Josh Goldberg, son of Yada Yada, and Leah Friedman entered into the covenant of marriage. So so before the wedding, there's a ceremony where the husband and bride, the groom and bride sit down with the rabbi, and they indicate that they accept the ketubah. And that's when it's called the bedekin. That's when they put the veil on the woman. Um, and then and then after the wedding, right after the wedding, there's somewhere they go before the celebration. It's called the yichud room. So yichud means being alone, and they go off to be alone. Um, Often there's food there because so it's technically long enough for them to finalize their marriage. But I don't think anybody really does that in the yichud room. Generally, there's some food there uh, because it's also traditional to not eat the day of your wedding. And if we go back to this, do we see it? So she's wearing white, he's not. The other thing that is traditional is for a husband to wear the kittel, the plain white garment at his wedding. There's 3 times you wear your kittel, actually a couple of times. So do you know when else you wear your kittel? Does everybody know what I'm talking about?
Yom Kippur?
Yeah, Yom Kippur. So so this is a kittel. Oh, look, he's there. He's wearing his all white. That is a weird picture. So Yom Kippur, we wear a kittel. You know what else?
In the synagogue, when the
Only on Yom Kippur in the synagogue. It's only worn on Yom Kippur. It's also traditionally worn at the Seder, believe it or not. So I put on my kittel for my Seder. Um, and then the last thing is when you die. So when you die, you're buried in your kittel. Um, so it's like these moments of complete spiritual intensity, complete spiritual focus. Um, okay, so okay. Oh, the Sheva Brachot. So the 7 blessings we said over wine There's also a custom, but it's kind of fallen by the wayside, certainly outside of Orthodox circles, that for the whole week after the wedding, people have meals with the bride and groom, and they say those Sheva brachot, those 7 blessings again. So that's called um, that's called Sheva brachos, the week. Um, the I also wanted to touch on divorce. So I said before, there's a midrash, the altar weeps when people get divorced. So it's not a sin, but it's something that should be avoided. Um, the process is that there's a handwritten document called a get. It's a piece of parchment that's actually it's fairly large, but it's handwritten, and it has to be handwritten by a scribe for these two people. It gets mailed. So the simple form is the husband gets it written and hands it to the wife. Often the wife and husband don't really want to see each other, so the husband will appoint an agent, a shaliach, and that agent will give it to the woman. So, I've been the agent a couple times, and basically, like the last time we went to Dunkin' Donuts, I had the get. We had two witnesses who were, traditionally speaking, witnesses have to be Shabbat observant Jewish men. So I had two Shabbat observant Jewish men join us at Dunkin' Donuts. I gave her the ketubah, I meant the get, and that was the whole process. Um, so if you get divorced and don't get a get, then halachically you're still considered married. And why is that a big issue?
The whole issue of the chained women who can't get remarried in Israel,
Yeah.
it's a huge thing.
Yeah. So number one, well, so number one, if a woman, yeah. So what the chained woman is she wants a divorce. He won't give it to her. It's up to the man, right? I said the man gives it to the woman. So if the man won't give it to the woman, then she's still married and she can't get remarried. So that's what they call being chained. And the other big issue is her children. If she does go and get remarried anyway and has children, those children are mamzerim, bastards, and they cannot marry a regular Jew. Um, Now, I think in Israel, there's a couple of ways they have of trying to resolve the issue of the aguna. One of them is to try to nullify the marriage in the first place and say, oh, they were never married. So they try to find some way to say they were never married. And then the other way is to basically beat the guy until he says, okay, okay, give her the get. Which is allowed because they say, well, inside he really wants to do the right thing and give it to her. So even though he's under duress, that's what it is. So back to marriage. One of the big values you guys should know about in marriage, it's called shalom bayit. So shalom means peace, bayit means home, and so shalom bayit means peace in the home. There's a very high value of keeping things peaceful in the home. So definitely through compromise and through whatever any other ways of keeping peace in the home. The Talmud statement is, if your wife is short, bend down and listen. There's a whole nother book that is really great. That I guess I don't know if I'll well, there's another book. Maybe if we have time, I'll talk about it, or maybe next week. It's called the River, the Kettle, and the Bird. It's a great book about marriage and about how to be a good partner in a Jewish marriage. I'm gonna put that I'm gonna hold off on that though because I'm not sure if we have time. Okay, so Tolishkin chapter 36. I asked you guys to read Tolishkin chapter 36. This is about revenges. This is about revenges and grudges. So here's the classic. Here's the classic definition of revenge. Here. Okay. A person who takes revenge against a colleague. Not sure why the word there is colleague. Um, but it's your fellow, right? Transgresses a Torah prohibition. As Leviticus states, do not take revenge. Skipping down, what is meant by taking revenge? A person's fellow asks him, lend me your hatchet. He responds, I refuse to lend it to you. On the following day, the person who needs to borrow a hatchet from his colleague, he asks him, lend me your hatchet. The latter replies, just as you did not lend it to me, I will not lend it to you. This is considered taking revenge. Instead, when he comes to ask for it, he should give it to him with a full heart without repaying him for what he did. So, how is this different from how we normally think about revenge? Is this how you normally think about revenge?
So usually you think about revenge as more as an active thing, like, but that also implies the Torah takes it even further. You are not even allowed to have revenge in your heart.
Right. So, right, revenge we think of as an active thing, right? Like I actually do something to harm you. Now, why? Now we already know that's prohibited, right? Like you can't harm your fellow. So here, revenge, right, is here it's inaction, right? Um, right, I'm not lending you the hatchet. I'm not inviting you to my birthday party. I'm not the Mesilat Yesharim. He says, if I don't smile at you the same way, it's revenge, right? If I say, okay, I forgive you, but then I don't smile at you or I don't shake your hands as warmly, that's a form of revenge. So it's taking it much farther than we're normally used to. Does that make sense, everybody? Okay. And then there's also the same verse talks about not holding a grudge. So, excuse me. Similarly, anyone who holds a grudge against another Jew violates a Torah prohibition. As Leviticus states, do not bear a grudge against the children of your people. What is meant by bearing a grudge? Reuben asked Shimon, rent this house to me or lend this ox to me. Shimon was not willing to do so. Sounds like our first case. A few days later, Shimon comes to borrow or rent something from him. Reuben told him, here it is. I am lending it to you. I'm not like you, nor am I paying you back for what you did. So what are they saying a grudge is?
Not just repaying evil for evil, but still holding on to what they have your feelings hurt.
Right. I'm I'm holding on to it. That's the grudge. I'm not like you. I'm not going to hurt you because I'm not like you. Yep. Um, so any that now we don't need to forgive a person who hasn't done teshuva, right? So this is really um so it's hard not I guess it's hard not to take revenge if a person hasn't done teshuva. In this one, has the person done teshuva in our situation? Have they done teshuva?
We're not exactly told, but it doesn't seem that way.
There's no right. There's no indication that they've actually done teshuva, right? So if a person hasn't done teshuva, right, they don't lend me my axe. They haven't done teshuva, but I still can't take revenge. I still have to lend them the axe. There's no indication they've done teshuva. Um, Now, do I have to forgive them?
Yes.
No. So this is interesting, right? I don't have to forgive them though. The I only have to forgive someone after they've apologized. I don't need to forgive unilaterally. Um, so once they've apologized, I have to forgive them. But on the other hand, I can't take revenge. So what are the subtle ways in our own life that we take revenge?
I did like the way it was listed there in the story we just read. That's you just hold on to it. Just my feelings are hurt, so I'm not going to be as nice to you or smile at you, even
Right.
walking in a hallway.
Um, so um, I notice a lot of little ways people in a home, people like when someone gets upset at someone for doing something, they'll say, "How could you do that?" Right? Any of those kind of trying to hurt someone's feelings, um, blaming, shaming, and what's the third one? Blaming, shaming, and pain, blame, and shame. In positive psychology, they talk about the three ways we typically respond when we're upset: it's pain, blame, and shame. And really, any form of trying to cause physical or emotional pain, blaming, oh, how could you do that? All of that is a kind of revenge. Um, okay, benching. Excuse me. So, um, we talked up till now about the daily prayers. We went through Shachrit. Um, I don't know if we talked about Mincha and Mariv. Did we talk about Mincha and Mariv? I have to go back and look. Um, so I don't think we did. So let's um oh, you guys see a whiteboard? It's like oh, you do. Okay, I don't know how to. I'm not getting any drawing tools on it.
Blank, but I can see the drawing tools as well.
It's weird. I cannot see the drawing tools. Uh, there we go. Now they're loaded. Okay, so we over the past some time have covered the Shachrit, the morning service. Um, And we went through all these prayers, so we're not going to go through them all again, but just generally speaking, where the first part of the prayer was the Birkot HaShachar, the morning blessing, the blessings on arising, as they say. Okay. The second part, what was the second part of the morning service?
Okay, the Zimra.
Sukkot de Zimra. These are songs, poems that kind of wake us up emotionally. The third part is what?
The Shema and its blessings.
Yes, third part is Shema and the blessings. Right, so there's two blessings before, two after. You know, I'm going to do it this way. Oh, ah. Okay, so we have two blessings for first is for let's say creation and the Torah, and then we have how many paragraphs of the Shema? Three paragraphs of the Shema, right? That when we say the Shema, it really is all three of those sections, and then we have one blessing on. Okay, and then we have the Amidah. Um, in Shabbat, we have the Torah service and Musar. Okay. Um, so Mincha, excuse me, the midday service, it's very, very short. It's very simple. Um, oh, then the closing prayers. So Mincha is very simple. It starts with Ashrei, Psalm 150, and goes straight into the Amidah. Um, okay, so that's pretty much just that's Mincha. Okay, and then closing prayers. But it's very, very simple. And then Mariv, there's like three opening verses that it's just a couple of, but basically it's the Shema and its blessings, and then the Amidah. Okay, so when we studied them, the reason we basically just did Shachrit is because these other prayers are just repetitions of the same prayers, and when Shachrit really includes everything. The one thing that's not in Shachrit is that there's a second prayer after the Shema, which is for divine protection, to the divine sukkah piece. Okay. Now Mincha can be done anytime after like it's not like a half hour afternoon, and Mariv can be done from halfway in the afternoon up through all night. It's traditional to just combine the two of them to do them once in a row. So there's a lot of places that'll have Mincha Mariv, and so like 5 o'clock or so, 5 or 6, they just do Mincha going straight into Mariv. Does that make sense? So any questions about the kind of 3 times a day prayer thing?
Do men put on tefillah during Shachrit, or is that a
Good question.
different?
Good question. Yeah. Men put on tefillin during Shachrit. The one day of the year men don't actually. So not on Shabbat and holidays, but during the weekdays we put on tefillin. The one day of the year we don't do it at Shachrit is Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av, we remember the destruction of the temple. We're very sad. Tefillin are kind of a happy thing. So instead we put them on at Mincha on Tisha B'Av. And the talis as well we put on at Shachrit. On Yom Kippur, we wear the talis all day. Any other questions about kind of overall structure? Excuse me. Okay. I'm sorry. So I think next week, for next week, maybe I'll give you a link for the benching, and I want to talk about the Birkat Hamazon, the benching after meals. But so maybe for next week, you can read through the benching. And for next week, we're gonna do Tazria Metzora, which is about leprosy, but it's also about what leprosy symbolizes, which is Lashon Hara. Blue Greenberg, chapter 14, and Talishkin, chapter 37 and 38. Any other questions for today? Or if not, I'll see you guys next week.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye, Liliana.